Good afternoon, my name is Damien Ivory. I run a small telco in Tasmania called Lontel. We've been doing the NBN for about 5 years. Now today I want to talk about the politics of the NBN. Now you may have seen my video on the history, and I'd highly recommend you watch that first, because some of the things in the politics will make a lot more sense once you've watched that. So the politics, the NBN has always been dogged by political arguments from both sides. The first plan was put out by Labor, and they set up a fibre to the premises rollout model, but in particular they set up a government-owned monopoly, a provider that absolutely was you had to go through if you wanted any sort of fixed line network. You had to buy it through NBN, or rather you had to go through an RSP that had to buy it through NBN. There were significant restrictions on other companies being able to roll out any sort of fixed line products, so fibre was severely restricted. Companies like TPG that had rolled out fibre in some of the cities, some of the buildings, they were essentially not allowed to roll out any more fibre or any more than an extra kilometre on their existing infrastructure. This is quite a strong way of setting up, or it's a very biased way of setting up an operation. It was roundly criticised by the Liberal Party, who fundamentally hate monopolies, with some good reason, and particularly government-owned ones. They're very much the party of small government, and they like to see the free market solve these problems. What is odd, though, is that the free market had had the opportunity to solve this particular problem for about 10 years. Many times the Howard government had tried to get Telstra, who was the incumbent telco at the time, to roll out better infrastructure, but had completely failed. So the NBN was a big target for the Liberal Party almost from the get-go. It was criticised by them for being too expensive, and the speeds that were going to be offered were just not needed. People did not need 100 megabits. And why are we spending all this money on an infrastructure where we've got a perfectly good one in the form of the copper wires? Why don't we just repurpose those, save a whole lot of money, and keep the government out of telecommunications? They continued with this level of criticism right up to the 2013 election. There was a lot of misinformation put out about the NBN, and frankly the NBN, being essentially a bunch of engineers, did not feel like it was their place to correct any of the mistakes, and the Labor Party did a very poor job of doing the same. Conroy, who was the Minister for Communications at the time, was well known for having an attitude that was something akin to my way or the highway, which is great while you're still in power, but of course come 2013 they lost power, and power changed over to the Abbott government. The Abbott government Abbott himself had famously said in the 2010 election, which he didn't win, that he wanted to bury the NBN. By the time 2013 came along, he'd been persuaded that the project was so far forward that it couldn't be completely scrapped, but it could be made a whole load cheaper. Malcolm Turnbull, who was the communications minister, came up with some plans, or they had come up with plans before the election, to roll out the multi-technology mix for a much cheaper amount, some $29 billion compared with the projected rollout cost for the full fibre of about $43 billion. Unfortunately, those figures turned out to be very wrong. Not only was it not going to be completed on time, they had promised 25 megabits to everybody by 2016, which was a very heroic goal, I think some commentator put it. I think it might even have been so it was clearly untenable. Did the Liberal Party do this deliberately, or were they just hopelessly misinformed about what the project was about and how hard it was and the issues that they would come up against? Either way, they completely missed that goal, not only in terms of the budget, which is now $54 billion, and certainly the rollout timescale has now been pushed from 2016 out to 2020. This delay is one of the issues with the funding for NBN. Many people talk about the cost of the rollout, and it's not the cost, it's actually what they call the peak funding. There are two sources of revenue to roll out infrastructure. The first is money you borrow, typically in this case from the government, to actually fund the project. But the second place is in revenues you're actually generating as you're rolling the project out, because you're already selling services, and so you're already getting some revenue in. The problem with that is that if there's any reduction in that revenue, if there's any people are slow to take up, then that will reduce that revenue and thus increase the amount of money that you need to put into the company to keep it afloat. And so this is one of the reasons why fibre to the node has ended up being a lot more expensive, is because they did not get the revenues that they were expecting, because people found that it was not a reliable network and they were less interested in jumping ship from their old ADSL across to the NBN. So we're coming up to this year's election, 2019. I want to talk about what the two parties are looking to do. The first is the Liberal Party have obviously been the masters behind the multi-technology mix. They've said that they've rolled out a fit-to-purpose network. I think that's been somewhat discredited, certainly in the engineering and technical circles. And they promise that they will do further future upgrades as required, without actually specifying what or when those will be. The Labour Party, on the other hand, under Michelle Rowland, has essentially put forward that they will do their best to make best of the existing project. Michelle Rowland has said we cannot undo 6 years of vandalism by the Liberal government. We have to accept what has been done and work with it. And that's an uninspiring but probably quite pragmatic approach. But we do still have to think about where we're going to be in 10 years' time. I think maybe not 10 years, but certainly in 20 years' time, it's a dead cert that we'll have fibre. It's just not possible for us to continue the economy growing or even staying where it is without fast internet access. So I think in some ways neither party is really coming up with anything that is exciting or interesting. So we have to kind of look at what the philosophies of the two parties are bringing to the party. So my take on the Liberal Party is that they don't fundamentally get the reason why we have the internet. The Liberal Party, well actually the government generally is made up of a very significant number of people who really do not understand technology. I've got some figures here. So 27% of the current government, this is across both Labour and Liberal, 27% of them are barristers and lawyers. 25% of them are ex-business people, and a further 16% are union officials or ex-union officials. So with the possible exception of the business people, certainly the first and the third group have really no reason to have any sort of solid understanding of what the internet does and what it means. The business people probably should, but I would argue that because these are probably ex-business people, they're not in business any longer, because if they were, they wouldn't be allowed to be in government. Their formative years were spent in the days before the internet. They probably have never worked in a business where if their internet goes out, they send their staff home. So you've got a group of people who are really not that switched on to what the internet really means to our modern society. And the Liberal Party, I would argue, suffers even more from that, because they're a conservative party. They like the status quo. They like things to stay the same. And so Tony Abbott was interviewed by Kerry O'Brien, and he famously said, "I'm not a tech head, you can't argue with me about tech facts because I have no idea," or words to that effect. And my immediate reaction is, well, why are you making decisions on very important engineering principles if you don't know? At least listen to some experts. Malcolm Turnbull has had some background in the communications industry, but he was very much of the ilk that governments should not be rolling out their own infrastructure. This should be something of private industry. So where are we going to go after the election? The Liberal Party, I would say, is really going to be looking at how do we sell this off, how do we get it off our books, what do we have to invest to make it more attractive, but really they have no strong policy around the NBN. The Labour Party, on the other hand, while they don't say they're going to be doing very much, and I think that's probably because they want to create a bit of a small target so that they don't have issues with the Liberal Party claiming that they're going to spend a whole lot of money and waste taxpayers' money, which they're very keen to do, obviously. So they have come up with a few plans to fix people's in-home wiring, which certainly will help a lot of fibre to the node installations. But they have not said that they'll be doing any fibre upgrades or come up with a plan. They have said that they will do a review into the whole NBN model and how it's to be funded and the like. My take is that they probably do at least partly get the importance of the internet infrastructure, but it's all really still up for grabs. So there isn't a lot to choose between the two parties, but I would say that the Labour Party is more interested in where we're going and will be more interested in where we're going to be in 10 or 20 years' time. All right, that's it for this video. I will see you in the next one.